Now, this is the beginning of our council conversations, and our first guest is Ward 5 Council Member Joe Hafner. Joe, welcome to the council conversation.
Thanks, Mr. Campbell. Happy to be here.
Well, you know, you've been on the council for, I guess, a year now, so you're no longer a rookie by any measure, and you know you're a seasoned veteran. Tell us a little bit about the things that you expected and maybe some of the things you didn't expect that you've discovered from a year on the council.
Well, I think some people would still consider me a rookie. You know, it seems like every meeting there's still new things we learn as far as procedures or, you know, things like that.
Well, this is not about Charles Frierson. Sorry, Mr. Frierson.
So I think every meeting is an educational opportunity in many ways, but the thing I've learned in a little over a year on the council is, you know, every issue matters to the citizens. You know, as trivial as it may seem to some people, you know, every item that's on the agenda is just as important as the other one to somebody. So, you know, I think that's, you know, a reason why, you know, I try to show up to every meeting being informed about what's on the agenda and do my homework before I get there, so, you know, I can ask intelligent questions, hopefully, and also, so I, you know, when as information is presented by both sides, you know, I can kind of understand what may be a fact and what may be an assumption.
Correct. You know, and that brings up a good point, because the law does not allow you guys, you council, the 12 council members, the law does not allow you to talk about issues before you get before the public. So homework, doing your study of all the information that's going to be brought before the council is pretty critical. Can you tell us a little bit how much time you spend doing that, and how much you're presented every agenda item, and tell us what is involved in all that package?
Yeah. Basically the way it works, and I know you know this, but the agenda is posted usually by 10 o'clock on Thursdays. And it's on Jonesboro, you know, it's on legistarjonesboro.org.
That's right. Anybody can
go to the agenda.
It's for the public.
Basically, the public gets it at the same time we do, because that's where we go to get the information. And you know, there's a meeting packet. You can click on it. It's got all the backup for every item on the agenda. And sometimes it's as little as, you know, 20 pages, and sometimes, depending on what's on there, it might be 300 pages. So, you know, you really have to start on that Thursday, Friday, you know, reading through the information, hopefully over the weekend go out and drive around, you know, Monday, do more work, Tuesday, you know, any final follow-up before you get to the meeting. Right. So, you know, at some weeks or some meetings, you know, if there's not a whole lot on the agenda, it doesn't take, you know, hours and hours and hours to prepare for the meeting. But if there's a lot on the agenda, or there's more controversial topics on the agenda, then obviously you want to make sure you're prepared when you get to the meeting, and you take the time to do it.
And you know, I've noticed lately it seems like we've had a trend of a lot of zoning issues. I know housing is an issue in Jonesboro. But you know what, I also know that's a nationwide trend. We're not unique in that. But can you talk a little bit about what you have seen in with people coming up here? We usually have a pretty good crowd at our council meetings. Right. But a lot of people, if you're not directly affected, you don't think to attend a council meeting. But why has zoning and housing been so controversial? And tell me what's difficult for you guys about it.
You know, one thing, and you kind of pointed this out, another thing I've learned in my first year on the council, I think people are more prone to show up for a meeting when they're against something rather than when they're for it, which isn't always a good thing, because the items that are, you know, could be more positive for the city, people don't show up to support, so the council may not think it's important. But as far as zoning and multifamily housing, I think sometimes there's a stigma attached to multifamily housing that maybe shouldn't be. You know, during my life, I've lived in apartments, I've lived in condos, and you know, just because something's multifamily doesn't mean that it's going to be a low income housing situation, or it's going to be improperly run or not look nice. So I think that's part of the reason, is that, you know, sometimes people hear multifamily and they think, you know, cheap housing, and, you know, people say, I don't want that by me. And, you know, Jonesboro, obviously, you know, we had to be aware of, you know, zonings and where particular things are, and a lot of that's laid out in the land use plan that kind of serves as a guide for us. But, you know, we want Jonesboro to be a place where everybody has an opportunity to come and live, and afford to live. But we also know that we have to do it smartly. And I think another, you know, reason that multifamily can be controversial is because, you know, people don't want it right by their house because they think it impacts property values. They think it increases crime. You know, in some cases it may do that, but I don't think it does that in every case.
Yeah, I think we've seen statistics that it does not necessarily enlarge and does not increase crime.
Right. You know, and sometimes the decisions the council makes, you know, or the zoning that comes before us for multifamily may be a more restrictive zoning where it actually reduces the number of apartments that can be put on property that's already zoned for multifamily. And we still have people fight against that, even though it's reducing the number of apartments. So, you know, when that happens and we approve that zoning, you know, it's actually a good thing in my mind.
Right.
But some people think, well, they approved another multifamily rezoning, so that's going to, you know, negatively impact us. But we may have just reduced the number of apartments in their neighborhood by 30 or 40 units, which is quite a bit.
Right.
So sometimes I think it's just a kind of a misunderstanding on multifamily issues also.
Is this a generational issue at some level? Because people obviously want to protect their older neighborhoods, what they've had forever. I mean, we've got some really nice neighborhoods close to downtown that have a lot of beautiful homes in them, and I think they've traditionally seen every other house in that neighborhood have an older home. But I'm wondering if millennials are more downtown people and less I want a big house and yard people.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I think you're maybe right to a point, because, you know, when our parents were growing up and we're growing up, it's like, hey, I want a house and a yard, and, you know, I want property and real estate. And it seems like today's world is a lot more, I want to be able to go when I want to go. I don't want to have to worry about mowing a yard or painting my house. Or so I think a lot of, and I know families that have done that. You know, their kids have moved out, so they're now looking for, you know, apartments downtown, or, you know, nicer condo somewhere. So I think that is, you know, a great point that you make there.
But now there are also legal ramifications. The city has been sued successfully by builders that wanted to build apartments. So tell us a little bit about the things that you have to weigh when someone comes with a rezoning request.
Yeah, I believe now there's 7 conditions that we have to weigh. I'm not going to sit here and
try to
quote them all, you know, right now. I mean, you know, obviously the planning department does a checklist of each of the points, you know, and put, you know, their check marks or X's when they meet them, and, you know, obviously things go through MAPC. And I'll tell you, I mean, some of the conditions, you know, are, I think, kind of vague. You know, like, does it increase traffic? Will it have an impact on traffic? Okay, yes or no. I mean, you know, that if it increases traffic by 10 cars, that's an increase in traffic, but that's not necessarily a bad thing.
Right.
So, you know, I think that serves as a guide. And, you know, the council or the city's been sued for being arbitrary and capricious. You know, that's the legal term. So I think whenever we're weighing these seven conditions, that we have to make sure that we're not doing it. I just don't want multifamily there.
Right.
You know, that's not a good point. I don't want it there because the street's not wide enough. The street can't handle it. You know, I don't want it there because, you know, of another, you know, objective measure that doesn't make it a good fit for that area. Right. And I think one thing that's going to help, and you may be going to bring this up, is, you know, we're currently in the process of, you know, approving or hearing the design standards for multifamily and duplexes and triplexes. And I think that's going to help a lot on the multifamily thing because it's going to, require the developer to build a nicer unit, to make it more appealing instead of, in some cases I think they've been thrown up as maybe as inexpensively as possible. And that's part of the reason why they have a stigma attached to them.
Yeah, yeah, I see a lot of that issue coming up, and I guess people have to understand that you are in that 7-test rule. You're having to work within that law as well as in their desires, and so that makes things a little bit
It's
difficult.
a juggling act, and our decisions aren't always easy. I mean, I've like I said earlier, I try to do my homework before I come to meetings, and I usually have a pretty good idea of which way I'm going. Right. But then when you hear some of the last comments from the public or questions that are raised by the other council members, because as you mentioned, we can't discuss these before we get to the meeting, so they'll bring up points that I may not have thought about. I mean, there have been times right up to the time I'm called on to vote that I'm a yes or a no, and it's so they're not easy decisions, and they're not ones we take lightly either.
But if people should get involved, if they have a stake in the process, they should get involved at the MAPC level before it even comes to council. Would you not say so?
Oh yeah, I mean definitely on anything. I mean and I'm glad you brought that point up because I was going to mention it later. Involvement from the public is vital for us doing our jobs. And it's on multifamily, it's on anything related to the city. So if we don't hear from the public, then either via phone call, an email, coming to the meetings, then they can't assume that we already know what they're going to tell us. A lot of times I've seen stuff, on another issue that happened early last year. There were many meetings about it. There was a lot of discussion by the committees, by the council, or not really it never made it to the council level. But, the person who was pushed, it was the pig issue. And the person who was, whose pig it was like, asking people to come to the meetings and, just practically begging people to come to meetings. And then, the last meeting, I think it was, 2 people here support it and several people against it. But, my wife on Facebook, was talking about everybody that was like blasting the council for, for not doing this. And I'm like, they don't need to do it on social media. They need to come to the meetings. Because we're not going to give much credence to stuff we see on social media, because that's kind of a faceless forum where people don't really have to,
identify. They don't have to identify themselves. They don't have to have facts either.
They don't have to have facts. I mean, Facebook is, we need to. Our stuff needs to be either via phone call, face-to-face communication, email, or at the meetings. Before we can give a whole lot of weight to it.
Joe, as you grew up in Jonesboro, so you. Correct.
Right.
You've lived here your whole life, and it's grown and it continues to grow. Can you tell me what do you think are the good things about that, and then what are the things that you feel like you have to manage maybe that are potential problems?
Right. Yes. Definitely born and raised here. People always laugh when I say this because I always tell people I'm the youngest of 10 kids, and so we have a lot of history in Jonesboro. My family moved here in 1964. And I was born in 1970, but I've had, all 10 of my brothers and sisters have graduated from Jonesboro High School. I've lived a few other places. After college, my career took me to New Orleans, to Houston, to Cabot, Arkansas.
Happy Mardi Gras.
Yep. And, but, when Margot and I, my wife, when we started having kids, we knew we wanted to get back to Jonesboro. And so we moved back here in 2004, and we have people have heard me talk about it at the council meeting. My daughter Cameron is a junior at Jonesboro. My son Braden is a freshman at MacArthur, and Jonesboro is a community that we're lucky because we have. I mean, we're a solid community, a solid city. We have several different economic drivers. You know, we're not like Detroit that just depends on the car industry. We have agriculture, we have industry, we have retail, we have ASU, we have the medical side. So we're very fortunate that we have 5 economic drivers that, you know, if one of them, if the business declines in one area, hopefully, you know, the city doesn't get impacted too badly.
We're balanced.
You know, and I think you saw that kind of back in 2007, late 2007, 2008, you know, when the economy dipped and, you know, several businesses suffered, but Jonesboro stayed pretty flat. So I think the advantages Jonesboro enjoys beyond the, you know, the 5 different economic drivers, you know, we have lots of land, you know, we have 80 square miles, you know, we have a diverse population, and, you know, the mayor always talks about we have a very giving community. But I also think that one of the negatives we have, even though it's a positive, is the amount of land that we have to cover too.
Right.
And, you know, it was interesting when I decided I wanted to run for city council, you know, one of the things I was looking at was the size of our, you know, the size of Jonesboro. And we're, you know, the 81 square miles, and I was like, wow, and I started doing some research, you know, that's bigger than St. Louis.
Yes, it is.
That's bigger than I think maybe Cleveland and
Cincinnati,
San Francisco, and, you know, we're as big as Conway and Springdale almost put together. Yeah. So, you know, although we have, you know, that means we have, we're not very dense. You know,
right.
our population is not very dense over those 80 square miles, so it gives us a lot of opportunity for land to be developed in the future. But it also, you know, our utilities, you know, City Water and Light, you know, even though they're a separate entity, they have to, you know, they have to service that area. Our police departments and fire departments have to cover that. The roads, you know, we hear, you know, I can't remember how many total miles of roads that we have.
It's more than 500.
You know, that we have to take care of. So that's, you know, that extra land, you know, even though you have it, it's a lot more to take care of, and it obviously it increases the expenses for the city, and you know I'm not going to sit here and question you know why we did the annexations and stuff, because there's always a reason
Throughout history,
and
right.
You can look back and question them, but you know so at the time I think the best decision was made to annex them, and in the future it's probably going to be a good asset for us, but you know the one thing where it didn't really help us was from the revenue side, you know, because, you know, the people who were living in those areas were probably already shopping in Jonesboro, you know, paying sales tax, which is our, you know, leading revenue producer. Right. And, you know, obviously it did increase, like I said, the expenses. Yeah. So I think our challenge moving forward with that is just going to be, you know, how do we continue to, you know, manage the land mass that we have. That
is, and tell me some of the things that I know the mayor has quality of life issues that we've been investigating as a city, and I know we're working on the pedestrian bike trail. We are working on a shooting range complex. We've purchased land that would host a aquatic center. All this stuff costs money, and as you just said, you know, our sales tax revenue is our main driver. I think 70% of the city's income comes from sales tax. So tell us what things have to happen, you know, to have some of these things, and which ones are priorities for you.
You know, I'm a quality of life proponent. I think quality of life's items aren't important only, you know, for the citizens to have, you know, more opportunity to go out and do stuff, but I think they're important because they bring people to the city. I mean, my daughter's been involved in Junior Olympic volleyball for years, and as we travel to these other cities for tournaments, I mean, it's amazing the number of people that are participating and you know spending the night, you know, 2 or 3 nights, meals. You know, that's just economic boons to the city that have these. So, you know, I think quality of life items are important for economic reasons. I think they're important for, you know, health reasons. I mean, everybody knows Arkansas is not at the top of the list when it comes to the healthiest states in the country. I mean, we're near the bottom. And I think, these quality of life items, are important also for, entertainment, gives people a chance to get out and do things as a family. But the challenges that we have, as you mentioned, is we have to figure out a way to pay for them. And, there's several different ways to do that. And all of them require a lot of work, and people don't just come hand you checks. You mentioned that we're currently in the process of putting together the pedestrian and bike path, plan. And if you have a good plan, it's a lot easier to get grant money. I mean, there's federal grants, there's private grants where people will come and match the money. And, so grants are one way that we have to look to fund some of this money. The shooting complex got a $2 million grant from the Arkansas Game and Fish Commission, and I know the mayor's looking for private donations to, pay for the rest of that complex, which I think is important because we don't have the funds to, to go spend an extra $8 million or so on a shooting complex right now.
But hopefully, when we get, if we get those donations, and they would come from largely from advertisers of guns and such.
Right.
Once we get that, we can use that range as a revenue source.
Oh,
correct?
yeah, definitely. I mean, that's the thing, and once you get these, I mean, like you said, and you asked me, how do you pay for them? I mean, grants are one way, private donations, another way. The way we probably would be our last resort, but something we have to look at would be, some sort of tax. And people hate that word, but we know that Jonesboro is the least taxed city or first class city in Arkansas. Right. And, with our 1%, city rate, does that need to be increased in order to help us do things that are going to keep Jonesboro relevant in the future? Yeah. And, once you have an aquatic center, once you have a shooting range, once you have, whatever quality of life item you're talking about, it's going to bring more people to the city. You're going to have swim meets, you're going to have shooting, contests. I mean, whatever the situation is, those people are going to come, but they're also going to turn around and leave. Right. But the other thing that these quality of life items do is they help you attract people, individual families that want to come to Jonesboro and stay and invest in the city. And one thing that's important on these is not just attracting people for jobs, whether it be at the hospitals or industry or Arkansas State, but we have thousands of kids graduate from Arkansas State every year. We need to get in there. They've got a great education. Jonesboro's got Arkansas State's got many different fields that they offer degrees in. We need to give those kids a reason to want to stay in Jonesboro. Right. and continue their life in Jonesboro. And it seems like too many times, I hear, and I heard this Friday night or last Thursday night, Joe, we're moving, as a doctor, an attorney, and their 2 kids, and they're moving to Northwest Arkansas. And, they had a great job opportunity, but they also said, we went up there and rode our bikes for, 30 miles, and, they enjoy getting out and doing stuff like that. So, these quality of life items are also something to attract people to Jonesboro because, it's good to grow. And Jonesboro's grown a lot over the years. But we want to make sure we, and I don't want this to sound, bad. We want, as I said earlier, we want Jonesboro to be a city where everybody comes because they think it's a better life for them. Right. That things are better in Jonesboro, whether it be, family related, personal, job, whatever. We want people to think they have a better life, quality of life in Jonesboro. But we want to make sure that, we have affordable housing for the people who need it, but we also want to make sure that we have things in Jonesboro that's going to attract, the doctors and the professors, the industry leaders. Yeah. And, you know, quality of life items are very important to do that.
That's right.
I mean, Jonesboro has a lot going for it. I mean, we have, as we mentioned earlier, we have a lot of land. You know, we have, you know, a strong industrial base. You know, we have I-555 now.
Right.
But we have to give city or industries and people a reason to want to come here, just because, you know, besides there's cheap land and utilities.
Yeah.
I mean, because, you know, as you mentioned earlier about, you know, the kind of the change in, you know, mentality of, you know, like when we were growing up to now, it's not all about what kind of incentives does the business get. A lot of businesses are looking, what's going to be the quality of life for my people when they move there. And that's why I'm a strong proponent of quality of life items.
Are there other things that you'd like to see? Are there other that we haven't discussed that are top of list items for you and trying to bring to Jonesboro or help with?
You know, really, I mean, the two main things that I'm concerned about right now are, you know, getting the additional revenue, you know, helping get the additional revenue sources. You know, as chairman of the finance committee, you know, I'm really concerned about, you know, the budget and the financial future of Jonesboro, because I know we can't keep going how we're going right now, but I also know that we can't just stop investing, you know, and because, you know, our streets will get, you know, in worse, you know, disrepair. You know, we need to continue to invest in our infrastructure. You know, the Craighead Forest land that we're looking at hopefully acquiring from Mr. Farmer, I think is important for our, you know, the growth of our parks, even though we do want to have, you know, the ability in the future to put parks in other parts of town. Yeah. You know, Craighead Forest is just kind of the main, you know, it's kind of our crown jewel yeah. when it comes to our parks department right now. But I mean, other things that are important to me besides, you know, helping secure the financial future of Jonesboro and the quality of life items are connectivity. And, you know, that kind of goes a little bit hand in hand with quality of life items. But, you know, I put together a sidewalk ordinance last year, you know, after, you know, the MAPC and the sidewalk committee, you know, had their turn with it. And I'm ready to get that going again, you know, get it presented to committee and hopefully have the council hear it, because I think connectivity is important, because, you know, not everybody in Jonesboro has the ability to drive, you know, cars. Right. And, you know, I know we have, you know, jets, which is, you know, growing, and I mean, it's really, you know, over the last few years has really grown in ridership, and the hub has really made a big difference there, as the mayor points out. But, you know, connectivity as far as the, you know, just sidewalks and neighborhoods for people to safely walk on. You know, being able to walk from, you know, neighborhoods, you know, behind Home Depot to Craighead Forest should be something that's pretty basic. But we got people walking, you know, in the street. You know, I picked my son up from school this week, and there was a girl walking in the ditch to stay out of the way of cars. And, you know, that it's a first-class city like Jonesboro, kids shouldn't be walking in ditches on their way home from schools. No. And, you know, I think I put together a good ordinance. You know, it's change. You know, people don't like change. But, and I probably shouldn't, I don't want to say it like this, but sometimes it seems like we find reasons not to do something that's going to benefit the city long term, you know, because it impacts negatively a certain group or something. But we have to, you know, as the council members, our job is to help Jonesboro grow for the long term, and not take a step that is going to maybe be difficult just because, you know, a certain group thinks it isn't warranted.
Well, you know, and once they see that change, they often embrace it. I think there were critics of putting in the trail at Craighead Forest right. Park, and now it's universally loved pretty much. And you know, and sometimes you forget. Do you remember what Caraway looked like just a little more than a year ago, before we covered the ditches there? And So that's progress that counts if you've seen it before.
Well, the thing, Mr. Campbell, like I said earlier, change is hard for people. But many different, cities in Arkansas and around, the country have embraced connectivity, and I think you'd be hard pressed to find one that has said it negatively impacted their community.
Well, Joe, is there anything else you'd like to talk about before we wrap this up?
I think we pretty much, hit the bulk of the topics that I had. The one thing I just want to stress is, is for our community to reach out to us. We're easy to reach. I mean, hopefully, we always call people back. I can be reached at, my number is 870-680-0803. And I'll also be reached via email at joeforjonesboro@gmail.com. And, I appreciate serving. It's not always people don't always agree with you, and that's part of it. I mean, I always tell people, I said, you may not agree with me, but I'm always going to make what I think is the best decision for the city of Jonesboro. And, we'll see how these next 3 years go, and hopefully I get a chance to continue to serving, and we can, make some good progress and keep Jonesboro growing for the future.
Well, that's wonderful. And I appreciate you taking the time to visit with us on Council Conversations. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Hope to do it again.
Absolutely.
Thank you.